Our next panel, Tehran's War on America and the West, will examine the Islamic Republic's use of terror, propaganda, and subversion and what steps are needed to stop it. Joining us for this panel are Victoria Coates, Vice President for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation, Andrew Ghalili, Nufti Senior Policy Analyst, Marjan Keypour, Founder and Director of Alliance for Rights of All Minorities, and Nishank Motwani, Senior Fellow at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. The panel will be moderated by Elina Shirazi, political correspondent at the Daily Mail. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Hello, everyone. So good to see you all. It's definitely, I have to give a shout out to Kamran for putting us after the Crown Prince. Thank you for that. That's certainly going to be a tough act to beat. But our panel today is going to be, as you can see behind us, Tehran's War on America and the West. And the Iranian government, as we know, doesn't really operate like most governments. It does some of its best work in silence. It operates in the shadows through its proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. So we're going to get into that today, as well as some of the impacts that this has on U.S. soil. So this is certainly a really good way to tie everything in to end this wonderful conference. But I wanted to start with you, Victoria. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for taking part in this panel. But speaking about those attacks on U.S. soil, so since 2011, there have been several attacks, including President Trump, former secretaries of state, journalists. And so my question to you is, how should the United States adjust its security and counterterrorism to protect some of these high-level officials? If we could start with you, since I know you worked in the administration, the National Security Council, so I know you have a lot of good expertise in the matter.
I have views. Is this working? Excellent. So thank you, Elina and Kamran and Your Royal Highness and all our friends at Nufti for putting together this great conference. It's always a highlight for those of us in the policy community in Washington. And I admit I take this a little bit seriously because I'm on their list of folks that are under threat, along with a number of us who were on the first Trump term National Security Council staff during the Qasem Soleimani action, for which I'm not sorry. And so that's something that we've worked on very hard. The previous administration refused to listen to us about the threats and the concerns, even while we were in dialogue with the excellent career FBI folks who took care of that file and would not provide us with any assistance, even cyber protections, alarms at the house, that kind of thing, interface with local law enforcement. They just said it wasn't an issue and they wouldn't deal with it. That has fortunately changed, and the FBI is much more forward-leaning now on these files. They've taken some people off some cases that we considered less of a national security imperative than this domestic threat in the United States. And I know Nishank is going to talk about the Australia issue, but we have to realize that they are here and they are active. And we do not know what crossed our southern border over the course of the last 4 years. There are certain groups we're particularly concerned about. This has to be first and foremost amongst them. So this is a problem that came in, when we wrote our Iran report in May about the potential U.S. strike. Rob Greenway and I defined that domestic threat as probably what worried us the most about a potential action against Iran by Israel, which we supported, but we thought it was important to point out this was a possibility and a vulnerability. So I do think we need more domestic counterterrorism on this and realize that we do have a foreign threat here present in the United States.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And on the topic of harassment, Marjan, if you can take this one, Iranian agents and proxies have harassed reportedly US-based activists and journalists, notable people. So what new federal and local measurements would you see be put into place that would help keep these communities safe?
Thank you for that question. And also, I want to thank Nufti and congratulate the organization for putting together such an incredible day. Really, I am so proud of every panel and every presentation, every project that Nufti has put together. And it's really an honor to be on your advisory board. And Your Highness, it's always inspiring to hear you speak. Absolutely, I think if there is any hope inside people, inside Iran, among the people who are increasingly desperate and increasingly frustrated by the mounting pressures and frustrations, it's really because of you and the hope that you bring to the society every time you speak. I know that it's what gets me going. And I know that it is the case for so many people inside Iran as well. But to go back to your important question, and I'm sorry for digressing, I just could not withhold my enthusiasm. To go to your question about the threat of transnational action on behalf of the regime right now inside the United States, the threats that we have seen against the journalists and the activists is real. I want to frame this issue, however, and make a comment that Iran is able to do this because they are repressing the journalists and activists and leaders inside the country right now. So this is a practice that begins on a domestic level and then it continues to permeate abroad. It also happens because Iran has a broad philosophy about its expansion views and export of the revolution abroad. It does so by controlling the narrative, by controlling how journalists are presenting facts, and by also challenging the democratic nature of the United States and the Western world. By weakening those elements, they try to find a way to infiltrate and impose their narratives, impose their way of challenging the norms that we have come to cherish for over 200 years in the United States. And that's a norm of democracy, and that's a norm of civility. So right now, as we speak, at least 200 journalists and activists in the diaspora have reported that they have experienced threats to their lives perpetrated by Islamic Republic and their agents around the world. 80 reporters or citizen journalists in the country have been arrested only since the 12-day war. So we know that they have amped up the repression of the civilians, but it's even more so. And there is a significant emphasis on journalists and activists because they want to control the narrative and infuse their own views. It's really not about the facts. It's about the narrative. It's about what they want us to believe. And when they do so, using a whole variety of techniques, it's not just it's assassinations, it's kidnappings, it's the list of the individuals, and I see that Ghazali is with us, and what they have done to your father, and what they have done to Ruhollah Zam, what they have done to try to do with Masih Ali-Nejad. So many activists and journalists. The list goes on. And for every name that we know and we recognize, I want to say here that there are people who are afraid of reporting what is happening because this is exactly how the Islamic Republic operates. They threaten you and they say, if you report this, we will punish your family in Iran, or we will take revenge on your loved ones, wherever they might be. So it is called coercion by proxy, and it's one of the other techniques they have, in addition to the cyber attacks and the threats that they present in other ways.
I just want to note, the threats mentioned so far against dissidents, of course, are our top concern. The other threats we typically talk about are missiles, whether nuclear or ballistic. I think something that's not talked about as often is Iran's influence operations. Their goal isn't just to get dissidents around the world. Their goal isn't just to terrorize and scare, but they have an effort underway to essentially destroy our way of life. Nufti did a report on the UK's influence operations, the regime's influence operations in the UK. This ranged from Islamic centers, cultural centers, education centers. They send groups of students to UK universities to learn about drones so that they can then bring that technology back to Iran to give to Russia to kill Ukrainians with. They have camps for young children in the UK, one of which was just closed, at least partially thanks to the Nufti report. So we're now working on the same report for the US, and what we're starting to find is that there are many states within the US that individually are each their own London. They each have a whole web of influence networks from the regime. The Islamic Education Center of Maryland in Potomac, the guy who founded it was found essentially by the CIA in the 1980s to be a regime agent, and has continued to open other centers to spread this ideology. This is just in the DMV that we've started. Michigan, Texas, California, New York. It's a really big growing problem. One that is not, I don't think, properly taken seriously because of all of the other threats from the regime.
And thank you so much, Andrew and Marjan. I think what you brought up too was super interesting with the media, because I remember obviously covering it and watching American media cover the Israel-Iran war, the 12-day war, and think, where are they finding these people that they're talking to? And just kind of the weaponization of American media is certainly a part of this discussion, because they're using national media to get across their message, and that is, by definition, propaganda. So that is something that obviously I've seen a lot of, and just raise alarms as obviously a journalist and an Iranian American. Where'd you find these people? Like, they don't represent us. So it's very interesting. And Victoria, I want to see if you could answer this one. I think a lot of people remember in this room, the IRGC was labeled as a terrorist group in 2019. So I wanted to ask you, what legal and diplomatic changes do you think would treat Iran as a terrorist entity rather than a normal state? And essentially, what would that mean in practice moving forward?
Well, one of my co-conspirators in that project, Len Kordakovsky, is here, of course. It was one of our finest hours because the bulk of the U.S. government did not wish to designate the IRGC. It had been brought up before. The State Department objected for a whole host of reasons. The Defense Department had probably the strongest argument, which was it could expose the U.S. military to similar designations and then give our troops vulnerability if they were traveling, something like that. But my feeling was throughout that the IRGC was so demonstrably a terrorist organization, and that it was not functioning in any way like a normal military. And so working with our colleagues in the Treasury Department, the State Department, and in the Defense Department, we built the case as to why their behavior was not just material support for terrorism, it was actually engaging in terrorist acts. And so, what we've seen here in the United States, when Avril Haines, the former DNI, came out in July of 2024 and said the Iranians have been here providing material support to the pro-Hamas protests on our campuses, that is the IRGC inserting itself into this kind of systemized anti-Semitism that they're using as a wedge to create divisions and disruptions in our society. And that is racial terrorism, for want of a better phrase. There are any number of other examples of their terrorist activities, and so our conclusion was it was necessary and right to designate them, and that we would do what we had to do to protect our own people in the event that these terrible things that were being predicted by DOD or DOW or whatever it is now, that they came true, we would be able to take care of our folks, and that all proved to be correct. And it's really heartening to see, Australia take this step, others, to say this is not a normal military. It should not be treated as such. It should not be elevated to that status. It is being used as an international, almost paramilitary organization. So that's what we did, why we did it, heaven knows the previous administration came in wanting to reverse the designation, but because of the hard work of so many people, they couldn't.
Yeah, interesting. So many countries, so many leaders still doing business with the government. And so what all of that means is definitely a big question moving forward as well. So thank you, Victoria. Nishank, I wanted to ask you specifically, European and Australian authorities have acted against Iranian plots. Just one recent example of this was when Australia expelled the Islamic Republic's ambassador over anti-Semitic attacks, as we've been discussing. So my question to you is, how can democratic countries better coordinate on things like sanctions, intelligence sharing, and extradition to counter Iran's global and vast, wide-reaching networks?
Thank you very much. And again, I just want to echo that it's an honor to be here, and thank you to Nufti for putting up this wonderful conference, and it's delightful to be here. Australia, I think one of the key things to remember is that this is all very recent. So on the 26th of August, so just a few weeks ago, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese gave a major press conference. Standing aside him was the Director General of the Australian Strategic Intelligence Organization, which is our domestic spy organization. We also had the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, and we had our Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke. And at that particular press conference, what the Prime Minister said was that two anti-Semitic attacks that took place in Australia in October and December of last year were directly linked to the IRGC, which resulted in two things. One was the expulsion of the Iranian ambassador, along with three senior Iranian diplomatic staffers. Second, Australia recalled its own ambassador from Tehran and significant number of staff and suspended operations in Tehran. And the other big move was that it said it would list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. The result of which is that it's unprecedented in Australia's history, which is to label an organ of a state as a foreign terrorist organization. If you look at the catalog of the states, of the entities that are terrorist organizations, I believe there's 31 of them. And so once this one is listed, it will add to that list. But the company now that the IRGC finds itself in would be Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas, and many other such entities, including recently added far-right entities such as Terrorgram, which is a play on Telegram. So what this does is that it really limits the extent to which countries are going to be able to engage with the IRGC. And in Australia's case, it criminalizes any association, linkage with the IRGC with a whole set of different criminal penalties. So to answer your question about how does this change and what can we do democratically, there has to be an order of priorities. One of the sources of funding for the Iranian regime is oil, and that is a significant that's a significant source of revenue which needs to be tackled. Second is that through the range of different Islamic centers and community organizations that it has, is that look at the propaganda material that's in them. Do a proper study to see what actually is being taught there, to see how those seeds of dissent are taking place and how they are going to be exploited, particularly around turbulent events when they do take place, whether it's campus protests, whether it's elections, which in the US it happens every 2 years in the midterms. Back home in Australia, we have federal elections every 3 years, and that is when you have information warfare that gets carried out. So there has to be greater coordination amongst, whether it's the Five Eyes, but also amongst the European countries who have not yet designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization, because it is, as Victoria said, it's a monstrous organization which has been carrying out and has carried out a range of different malign activities to really coerce people overseas and, of course, within the country.
Thank you so much. I don't know if you saw that the State Department wants to pass some laws to not let Iranian diplomats shop at Costco. I think that's going to serve the biggest blow that we've seen so far. Victoria, if I can also have you answer this one, talking about Iranian cyber units, targeting even things like U.S. water systems, probably one of the last things that we would think about, as well as other local infrastructures. What cyber rules, requirements, and funding, in your opinion, should be prioritized to protect some of these local services?
This is a really serious problem, and what they went after are these little regional companies, or utilities rather, that are not in this sort of federal level in terms of their security, and you don't think about the Iranians weaponizing water in regional U.S. markets. It's just it seems bizarre, but that's where they're headed because they know that's where the vulnerabilities are, and it extends from water to electric to telecommunication, whatever you'd care to mention in the utility sphere, because that can be fairly easily disrupted now through cyber means. And so I think there's a ton of attention to this in the new administration, to hardening those various grids, networks, making sure that we can prevent that kind of easy disruption, that we have duplicative levels of redundancy. So if one level goes down, you have another one there to provide that critical service. And the bad news is, as Americans, is it's not just Iran. It is also the North Koreans, China, and Russia, their closest friends, all of whom are interested in this, and they're all collaborating on it and pooling resources and knowledge. And so I think we are very fortunate that none of this has risen to the critical level yet, but I would be amazed if we get through much more time without a very concerted national effort on this, that we don't have a problem.
Thank you, Victoria. I want to go back to the oil smuggling that we were talking about, Nishank. Iran earns a lot of illicit revenue from that. So I'm wondering, in your opinion, what enforcement tools do you think would sort of break up Iran's web of oil smuggling, and what are the best enforcement ways that you see that moving forward? Would it be insurance, shipping, so on and so forth?
I think if you break down that question and look at it from different levels, you have the international, regional, and then the key bilateral relationships that Iran utilizes and really depends on as a way to continue that revenue flow occurring. So at the intersection of the international and regional level, recently there was the SCO summit that took place in China, which was followed by a very grand display of what I call deterrence pageantry. So there it's the linkages that Iran has in terms of its oil revenue generation capacity, they need to be unpicked. So going after and putting pressure on the countries that trade with Iran, especially when it comes to oil. Secondly, you take it down to the regional level, and you enforce that more. In a way, you can go after commercial shipping, make insurance costs higher, make it harder for them to sell their oil. But also, I think another tool that can be used is to use reputational damage. If you're purchasing oil, whether it's from Russia, whether it's from Iran, there have to be reputational costs as well. And the political costs will follow the reputational costs, the economic costs, and at the regional level. Then at the core bilateral level, there are some countries that obviously provide Iran with the key sources of revenue. So either you work with them, you isolate them, but you call it out. And I think that needs to be done. And so far, that's an area we haven't seen much action on. But there can be that concerted level at those different stratas to amplify the pressure on Iran.
And China is one of the biggest clients of Iran's oil, correct?
That's right. China is one of the principal beneficiaries of Iranian oil.
Just one little footnote there. There was a weird moment, or I think it was earlier this year, it might have been last year, when Malaysia suddenly became China's biggest supplier of oil. And those of us who watch the markets were like, what? And the Iranians were just dumping the oil in Malaysia, and they were transferring it to another ship and sending it in as Malaysian oil. So that was an interesting trick.
Certainly something to keep an eye on. Marjan, if you will, I wanted to ask you this as well. I think you'd be great for this one. Tech platforms have blocked Iranian disinformation campaigns that primarily have been targeting students and politics. But what rules, and this is a fine line here to dance, do you think platforms should follow to expose and stop these operations, while in the same vein also being able to protect free speech?
So yes, there was a situation, there has been situations where tech platforms have actually warned that they were being penetrated by, again, more of these techniques of aggression perpetrated by the Islamic Republic and their agents to create problems, to interrupt the flow of information, to create an imbalance in the level of, in the difference between truth and falsehoods, and also really to increase the level of fake news and make that go viral, or divisive news that would create problems and discord among the American people. There was some notice of some reports of strong effort, but I would say low reward for the Islamic Republic at the level of college campus activism. They were trying something called letters from the leaders, and they tried to artificially make that go viral. They really put all of their bots and their human bots behind it in order to make this go viral, but it really did not go very far on the level of college campuses or letters for you, really trying to connect and take credit for the student movement by getting the Islamic Republic to be the force and add more fuel to the fire. But more dangerously in my mind, or equally dangerous in my mind, has been the effort to interfere with the election process by creating disinformation about candidates and to cast doubts about the process of our elections. There were questions about phishing attempts, attacks to the email accounts of high-profile, high-level candidates. And whether you could say that the candidate of choice of the Islamic Republic will get elected or not, or whether you can say that, without reasonable doubt, the account was penetrated and compromised in one way or another. I think there is a secondary damage that we will all suffer from if this kind of behavior and this kind of and I'm not even a tech expert, but this form of cyberbullying and cyber attacks continue. It erodes the unity of American society. And whether or not this candidate is won or that candidate has lost, people will lose faith in the election process as a whole, and they will also lose trust on even the candidate of their choice. And this is exactly what the Islamic Republic is trying to do, because they want to weaken democracy, as I said, from its core. I'm just going to say one more issue, and this goes back to what Victoria was talking about regarding the level of dismissiveness that has existed in Washington, before. I was speaking to someone who was actually very well versed in the threat of Islamic Republic. They're very knowledgeable about the issue. And I showed them pictures of Arba'in from 2021, I believe. How many of you know what I'm talking about? The pictures of the Arba'in outside of the White House, right? So Arba'in, for those of you who may not know, is the 40th day that is commemorated since the death of Imam Hussein. And it's a very important Shia holiday, and it's a day of mourning. And there was visible, I can't say that it is as big as all the other protests that happen outside of the White House. Nonetheless, for me, as someone who grew up in Iran during the regime, and I saw the wrath that is in these protests, I saw these flags being positioned, and I showed this to my friend, and I said, what do you think of this? And said, well, that's not a big deal. I said, no, this is exactly Islamic Republic's promise to turn the White House into a Hosseiniye, a shrine for Imam Hussein. So this got me curious. I did a little bit of research to see which American journalists had covered that particular protest. And I did not see one single example. I even did an image search from that day to see which American news outlets would be covering it. And beside English language section of Iran International and other diaspora media, there was nothing. But if you were to look at the Iranian media in Persian language, especially the state-sponsored media, they were seeing this as a step closer to the realization of their dream, to turn the White House into a Hosseiniye. And I'm telling you, hundreds of articles bragging about how they are coming close to turning the White House into a Hosseiniye. And the fact that there is this level of disconnect, that their English language people are not even recognizing this dream, nonetheless, and needless to say, seeing it as a threat, is really a threat in and of itself, and we should be really aware of it and open their minds.
This is kind of what I was getting at when, one of the goals of this panel is to counter this idea that's growing on both the left and the right, that that the regime in Iran poses zero threat to America, to Americans, to Europeans, et cetera. Again, it's easy to say, well, they won't nuke us, or they won't bomb us, or not now, right? Again, we've heard this from many commentators on both sides. It ignores the fact that many of our panelists today have extra security with them here today because they have threats out against them, active threats out against them from the regime. I wonder if the president is being made aware that there are regular new threats from high-level regime officials and clerics inside of Iran against his life. Fatwas have been issued in the last 2 months. So it's as you said, the coverage of this isn't really there. So I don't know if people fully see all of these things. So maybe it's easy and they feel right saying, well, they pose zero threat to us. They're never going to bomb us because we would obviously eliminate them, and they know that. It's
a combination of arrogance that we are so great, we're so big, nobody can harm us. And also, I hate to say it, it's also a level of prejudice to think that these people are not capable of it. And I think it's a very dangerous combination.
I think even going beyond that, we have to understand that the threat is going to continue until the regime ends. We saw, Behram and Saeed here wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal where they made the point, we saw with the fatwa with Salman Rushdie, it took 30-something years for that to take effect. This is an ongoing fight that is not going to end in the next couple of years until the regime is gone.
Just to add to that, I think what it also expresses is the way the regime manifests itself and carries out its action is that it's really clear it's very ideologically based. This is ideological fundamentalism at play where they've created an enemy image of their counterparts, and that enemy image is very much based on who the other person is, who their counterpart is, as opposed to what they do. And when that particular enemy image and the basis on which it's created becomes the filter through which they see the outside world, pretty much anyone is the enemy.
Thank you. Just offering my 2 cents on this unsolicited with the why aren't reporters covering this and that. It's just working in a traditional newsroom, working in several. I can, tell all of you so many pitches that I've done and tried to do that haven't exactly worked because there was no big, missile or any kind of weaponry used, or there wasn't a full-blown war like the Iran-Israel war. There were kind of the signs. The writing was on the wall, but a lot of the media didn't really start reporting on that until everything was sort of over and done with. And so to answer your question, that's kind of the inside look there. And of course, as an Iranian American, I'm always trying to pitch those stories just to kind of follow up on it, since we do have a good look at what's going on. But going back to the, the hate speech, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism is, as we have seen, full front in the Iran-Israel war, really central to the Iranian government's ideology, their propaganda. Israel is one of the United States' biggest allies in the Middle East, and so many things are shifting in our landscape. Victoria, if I could ask you, in your best knowledge, how do you think the United States should address this threat through Homeland Security or things like community protection programs?
This has been central to a lot of work I've been doing over the course of the last year. I wrote a book on Israel after October 7th and what had kind of emerged. And one of the things that I think was really startling to most Americans was the organized virulence of the anti-Semitism that seemed to be waiting for a sign. This did not try to hide itself. It was, and as I said, organized, ready, and sprang into action, and that we had allowed that situation to so metastasize, specifically but not exclusively on campuses, is really chilling. And we have to realize this is not just a spontaneous response to the government of Israel by some romantic young Americans. It isn't. It is organized. It is being implemented as a program. And the worldview here, and one unpleasant thing to do is go back and look at different manifestations of anti-Semitism, and you could argue that something like the Spanish Inquisition was primarily a religious movement. The Third Reich was racist. This is civilizational, and so they don't care if they're finding people in Australia or Israel or the United States. It's that those need to be disrupted, even if you're a state like Australia, which is ostensibly quite pro-Palestinian. That doesn't matter. What matters is you're a Western-leaning democracy, and so you need to be disrupted. And in that worldview, Israel's the little Satan, and the United States is the great Satan. But we're both Satan. And if you think you're on a crusade to defeat Satan, if you get the little one, you're not going to end there. You're going to go on and say, well, we're going to go for the big one. And so we, as Americans, have to realize, that this is not where the heart of the Iranian people are, but this is where the heart of the regime is, if they have one. And that's what they're trying to achieve. And so, we as Americans have to wake up to it. It's why we have initiated the National Anti-Semitism Task Force. I'm proud to have Eli Kohianim, one of my co-chairs of that, here today, doing the important work of Project Esther, which earned me something I never thought I would have, which is a profile in the New York Times. Because the New York Times thought it was really shocking that a bunch of people at the Heritage Foundation think it's a bad idea to hate Jews. But this is, they were amazed. But this is why it's so important. And so, yes, there's work we can do with local governments. There are legal challenges, what the administration is doing with our institutions of higher learning. These are all the actions that need to be taken to disrupt this.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I think a lot of times with the Iranian regime, when there's smoke, there's fire, but you don't really see it till it's full blown. And I've had so many officials from the State Department say, Iran's trying to hack into this, Iran's trying to hack into that, this is happening, and the other. We've seen Iran exploit US election cycles to launch operations and kind of create this distraction method. So my question, I'm looking at you, this one's for you. I want to ask you, what systems do you think that democracy should create to, in essence, stay alert and ready during these predictable, is safe to say, distraction periods?
I think a whole range of measures, and some of them have already been covered. I think one which requires steady implementation is spotlighting it. Spotlighting the areas around which there needs to be better transparency around, which would allow for greater, one, public awareness, but secondly, also community intervention. Third, and I'm talking about at the local level, tactical level right now, because so much of the entry points are in fact tactical. They serve as entry points where they can really as in the IRGC, can really exploit cleavages. So it is paramount to have that degree of community outreach at the local level, and I'm talking about specifically in Australia's case, where they have been, where in both the anti-Semitic cases last year, which were linked back to the IRGC, is to see what are the linkages also between them and organized crime. Now, this is not to say organized crime is behind it, but they're certainly being used, and they're happy to be paid to extend the arm of the IRGC. So, number one, at the local level. Secondly, in terms, especially amongst the Five Eyes, but also extending to the EU, is greater policing cooperation. And I think that it also should extend to the fact that Australia has taken the unprecedented step of designating the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization. Other countries that have yet to do so, who are dealing with the consequences of not being able to, should also consider and ratchet up the pressure against it as a way to really close the areas through which it exploits these the freedoms that we all care about and enjoy.
Thank you so much. Yes, please.
Yes, I just wanted to also add, there's significant importance in coordination on an international level, but also domestically, I think that our government can do better between the FBI and CIA and DOJ and Treasury. All of these elements can also do a better job of coordinating and sharing threats, regardless of partisan politics. I think these are really American values that are in danger right now, and it's really important that we take them seriously. Also, in terms of one of your questions about cyber information, digital information, and content moderation. Yes, there is always fear that these content moderators are going to exploit by restricting speech. But I think that the onus is on the content moderators to show transparency about their methods and about the algorithms also, so that they are not influenced by these outside malign influences. Lastly, I just want to let you know that I'm aware of the fact that I use the term cyberbullying to talk about cyber attacks, but I see the regime as a big bully. Therefore, I think whatever they're doing in the cyberspace is also a cyber bullying. So just wanted to put that out.
Thank you so much, Marjan and Nishank. I think bottom line, it's obvious that the Iranian government uses a mixed bag of tricks, if you'll call it that, for coercion. Whether it be cyber attacks or propaganda or lobbying or even using, yes, the media to get their message across. So whoever wants to take this one, I wanted to ask you, essentially, what is needed, would you say, to sort of counter the whole system of the Iranian government and not just go after it in bits and pieces, to really get to the root of it?
Very quickly say, I think we do need a special envoy for Iran to be the head of this program. That's not just limited to negotiations over the nuclear program, which are hopefully a moot point, but to coordinate these efforts. The Costco thing is funny, but it's also symbolic. We all saw all those pictures of Rouhani and Zarif and the big pallets of stuff they were buying. This was something I worked on with Senator Cruz when we used the terrorism designation as a means to deny a visa. But all of this needs to be coordinated, that this is an attack on our country. And so it does have to do with the civil infrastructure and that issue. It has to do with the information spaces, as Andrew said, but that we all need to bring these things together and realize that we face a major threat. And this is a major threat we just struck. We struck them decisively. They couldn't do anything about it. They know we can do it again. And yes, they had their theater in Qatar, but that wasn't really a response. So we have to be on the lookout that this is now a game afoot.
Yeah, actually my report today was a little bit about that. The Ritz-Carlton in Doha hosting Hamas and Iranian government officials, which is a American hotel. So that kind of underscores the kind of points that we've been making about, does the government really take them seriously? Do they really see the IRGC as the threat that they are? And it just underscores, I guess, bigger questions about that whole thing. So any other final thoughts? If not,
I'm just
yes.
going to add one thing because I thought somebody else was going to say it. And since it wasn't said, I'm going to say it. Better than banning Costco, for banning these agents from going into Costco and buying microwaves or whatever they were buying, I think it's better that we deny them visas so that they don't come to the U.S. for the General Assembly in the first place. Number two, I want to build on what Senator Cotton brought about last week regarding the influence of Iranian regime inside the White House and inside the government. And the fact that we still don't know what is going on with Robert Malley's credentials, there's no transparency about it. Even right now, we need to know what is happening and why there are still certain vestiges of the last administration and the Iranian regime still inside the government. We need that to end. And better yet, I think there needs to be a much more comprehensive background checks for anyone, not only getting a job inside the government, but also those highly coveted positions in university departments, whether it is professorships or chairmanships. We need more diversity of opinion. Forget the fact that we have Mousavian and Mahallati still, hopefully not for long, they were there for such a long period of time. It's really incomprehensible to me, and we need to have better systems to control for these issues.
And I know we're going over it. I just wanted to point out that Molly's at Yale, and he just invited Zarif up to lecture.
Or Harvard, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but he actually went to, I don't know how he did the jump from Princeton to Yale, but Zarif is going to go up and imagine if you were paying that tuition and your kid came home and said, oh, this person came.
Thank you so much to everyone who was here today. Thank you to our lovely panelists. I always learn so much when I do this, so thank you to Nufti for inviting me back. And thank you to everyone again for being here. As Victoria said, we've run out of time, but I hope that everyone else enjoyed our discussion today. So thank you everyone for being here. Thank you so much.